This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 297 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with photographer Becca Matthias about capturing better images of our home gardens. The plant profile is on lemongrass, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on how to zoodle your zucchinis from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Rebecca Matthias. Welcome, Becca.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you on. We're going to talk about all things garden photography. But before we get into that, Becca, since this is your first time on the GardenDC podcast, we always ask our guests, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb?
I honestly got into gardening much later than my appreciation for nature and gardening. I bought a house with my partner Connor 2 years ago here in Wilmington, Delaware. We have a cute little row home, and it's the first time I've actually been able to garden. One of the reasons we loved this house so much is because there was like a tiered backyard garden situation, and it was really cute for living in a city. So since then, we have worked with a landscape designer to make it better. It was kind of half there, and I'm also super obsessed with container gardening. So if you come out on our front stoop, I think people walk by every week and they see a new container pop up. So I'm kind of obsessed.
I love that phrase, garden situation. I can imagine when you were shopping for your home with your realtor, you were like, find me a place with a garden situation.
Yeah, I need something green. But I didn't want a lawn. I knew that. I wanted a cool space, but I didn't want to have to deal with maintenance of a lawn. So we got that.
I love that. And I love your passion for containers. That is one of the most fun, in my opinion, ways to garden, and especially for beginners, it's the easiest way to start.
Definitely.
And great for urban and small space gardening, as we know. So let's talk about your photography background. So how did you get into being a photographer?
I feel like I never know how to answer that question because I think it's been my entire life, honestly. Growing up, I was the kid with countless disposable cameras. I photographed everything. School field trips, family vacations to the Outer Banks. My American Girl doll, Samantha, I would take her outside and like pose her on the tree and stuff. My Beanie Babies. I just loved taking pictures of anything. And, going from disposable cameras and film to, those little digital point and shoot cameras. And then eventually I went to college for photography, and that was around the time that I bought my first DSLR camera with my own money, and I was super excited. I thought I knew what I was doing, which is funny looking back. And then I got it, and I said, what is this? Like, why are my pictures turning out super white or super black? Like, I just don't understand. And that was the reality of, okay, I might be good at having the eye for it, but I had no clue what to do in the technical aspect. So around that same time I was in college, I actually joined Longwood Gardens as a member. And that was the time when I was practicing my camera on plants because plants weren't going to talk back to me. I could point my camera at a plant for about 10 minutes, play with settings, try to understand it, and it wasn't going to yell at me to stop. So I was continually going to Longwood just to practice. It was a great place for me to learn. Obviously, I learned a lot in school as well, but a lot of how I learned best as a creative was practice, practice, practice. So I would walk around Longwood, and around this time, Instagram was just taking off. I was sharing those photos to my Instagram account. I was tagging Longwood. I was just in love with Longwood. I thought it would be so cool if I could be a photographer for them one day. I remember just that was always what I was putting out into the world was it would be so cool to do this. But when you're in school, you try to say this to professors and they say, hey, maybe you should learn how to photograph people. Plants and nature might not be the best route for, making a business. So, that gets in your head when you're starting out. But there was always that passion there for gardens and nature. And it's a really cool full circle moment in my career because as I was sharing all those pictures to Instagram, one day I got a DM from the social media intern at Longwood. And she was like, hey, we're really loving the work that you're sharing. Would you like to join our volunteer photographer team? And honestly, I had no idea that even existed. So I was thrilled. I went in, talked to the marketing team, and I quickly became a volunteer photographer. So basically that meant I got to go to Longwood, do what I was doing where I was just taking pictures and having a good time, and then sharing those photos with Longwood, and those photos would end up on social media, like promotional materials. They were kind of just put out into the world, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. As my career started taking off, I was working at a full-time job. The pandemic happened, and that really shifted my photography career, honestly. I soon left my job and became a full-time photographer. My business was really starting to take off around this time, and it was harder for me to prioritize being a volunteer. And I still really loved sharing my work with Longwood. So after some conversations, I actually moved into a contractor role, and I've been a contractor with Longwood Gardens now for about 4.5 years, which is so surreal that in some capacity I've been photographing for Longwood for about 9 years, and garden photography is such a huge passion of mine.
I love that journey, Becca, and your professors would be proud of you, I'm sure. And you may be surprised as well. And it's great to hear that you put that out in the universe and it came to fruition. And so our listeners are all over the world, but maybe those in the Mid-Atlantic are familiar with seeing some of your images. So maybe you can share where they might have seen some of them.
Yeah, Longwood Gardens, if you're not familiar, is one of honestly the best botanical garden ever, my biased opinion. But you can find a lot of my work on their Instagram, which is at Longwood Gardens, or on their Facebook by just searching Longwood Gardens. Some other really cool things. The most recent Longwood Gardens Christmas book came out last winter, and my photo is actually the cover of that book, which is super surreal.
I didn't know that. I'll have to look that one up. And I know you did photography this year for the Philadelphia Flower Show, and some of your photos were used for this year's promotion for that show.
Yeah, I got involved with the PHS, Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, about 2 or 3 years ago, I believe. Again, I'm always trying to share my work and get it out there. And it's really cool when the right people see it. And yeah, I've been working with PHS. I've photographed the flower show now. This past winter was my third flower show to photograph. And it is such an exciting week, a very tiring week. And I'm not even there like everyone else for that like week and a half long process. But this year was really cool because they invited me a few days before the flower show actually began. And I got to see the behind the scenes of everyone creating their exhibits, which is as a photographer, because I just don't do garden photography. I do weddings and portraits, but my style is very much telling stories and showing real life. So it was really cool to be able to do my love for garden photography and my storytelling aspect as well.
Yeah, and I know how challenging it is to photograph gardens inside a convention hall. It's not the easiest thing. And I was thinking about your story about Samantha, the doll, posed in your garden. And when I was little, I collected briar horses. I still have my briar horses. And it's a thing to photograph your Breyer horses in a natural setting as if they're a real horse too.
I love that.
So I was thinking a lot of those skills would apply to some of those artificial settings for a garden.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember when I first photographed that first year I did the flower show, I was like, why do my photos look like this? I was like being really hard on myself for not I was literally comparing the convention center to what I do at Longwood. And I had to step back and remember this is theatrical like lighting. It's not going to look like it does in natural light. And once I really talked myself down from an editing crisis, I realized they were good photos.
And they ask you back, so that's a good sign.
Yeah. Signs I'm a little too hard on myself, but that's okay.
We're always our toughest own critics, and that brings us to photographing our own gardens. So many gardeners want to document their own gardens. Maybe they want to share them on social media, but maybe it's just for yourself, right? You want to see how your gardens change over the seasons, over the years, be able to look back and take beautiful pictures of your own garden and capture it. So that's the focus of this episode. And maybe we'll start off, Becca, with some photography basics.
Now, the best camera you have is the one you have with you. So again, if you have a DSLR, a mirrorless, or a camera you're familiar with, use that. But if that is too overwhelming, I love my phone. Oftentimes when I'm not out on a job and using my camera, I love to just go for a walk in a garden or photograph my own garden with my phone. It's easy, it's lightweight, I know what I'm doing, and you don't have to overwhelm yourself with all this technical stuff when most of the time it's just about slowing down and noticing. I think more often than not, we're always in a rush and we're always just like pointing your camera or your phone at your garden and you're like, take a picture. And you look back at it and you might be like, that was okay. What can I do better? Just take a second to really sit in that space and see, the way the light's coming in, or, how the wind is making the plants move, or just noticing little like vignettes of your garden of, if you have like a lawn ornament or something like that in your gardens and being like, oh, I really want to photograph this. What's around it? How can I tell a story? It's honestly the art of kind of slowing down and just seeing before you actually take a photo.
That's great advice, Becca, because I don't slow down. I love to whiz through a garden that we're visiting. So both of us have just been on the Fling in Buffalo and have visited other gardens at the same time together. And you're so much more, I was going to use the word methodical about it, but you're considering your shots. I'm just running through, want to look at the whole garden, want to take a picture of everything, and then later I'll go and edit it and winnow through what I took and delete half of them.
Which is funny you say that, because I feel like the Fling is the one like garden photography thing where you really are, you have half an hour potentially at like a really cool garden and you have to go in and you're seeing it for the first time. You're surrounded by a ton of people and you have to think quickly. So you don't really have that slow down kind of moment. But in those situations where you only have a limited amount of time, I find like, what am I most drawn to in the garden? You can walk into space and be like, oh my gosh, I'm a sucker for echinacea and native gardens. So when I see those in any sort of garden, that's like the first thing that I run to. And I'm like, how can I tell this story of these pollinating plants in the space that it's not just, an up close picture of this beautiful flower?
And I think looking out for those pollinators and visitors to a plant kind of, tells that story. And we'll get into storytelling in a minute. But you first talked about equipment, that the camera in your pocket, your smartphone, is perfectly fine to use. And
Totally.
I think that's what a lot of us have anymore. Do you have any suggestions for taking better smartphone pictures?
Yes. I might be in the camp of I do not like phone's portrait mode. It's most of the time, now I can't speak to other brands, but I don't like the way that it processes because it's not actually the camera, it's the software in it that is processing this depth of field. So, especially when you photograph a plant that's a little bit more wispy, you'll notice if you take it that sometimes it looks blurry in some spots and then sharp in others, and it can look wonky. So, my that is one of the first things I say. Just use the regular camera mode, the portrait mode. I'm not a personal fan of. And second is keep that flash off. There's nothing worse than when your phone is on automatic flash and it goes off. That's just going to wash out the plants. Most of the time, you shouldn't be photographing in the complete darkness, anyways. So just turn off the flash and use the normal camera function in your phone.
Yeah, I agree. Natural lighting is best, and that brings us to maybe best times of day to photograph your garden when you get the best light.
Yes. Obviously, not everyone has like when we were in the fling, let's say that was a tricky time because we were visiting most of these gardens at midday. If it's really sunny, notice in your own garden how light falls. And this is an art and a practice. Honestly, wake up and look at how the light is hitting your garden. You'll notice it's probably soft, depending on, which direction the sun's coming in. It could be this like warm light, but it's generally softer. And as the day goes on, at midday, you'll notice shadows and highlights are getting pretty harsh. You can take a picture and you can quite literally see the contrast is so like stark. It just, everything feels almost too sharp. I find when I photograph midday on my camera, and I don't like that. It's not visually appealing to me. And then as you get into the evening, you'll see it gets softer again, especially around golden hour. It's just noticing where the light falls in your garden at the best times of day. And most of the time, it's not midday. So that's why I always say morning, evening, but that middle of the day, sunny day, probably not the best time to go out.
Yeah, so a couple hours before dusk, a couple hours after sunrise or just after sunrise. And then overcast days are my favorites, especially when you have to do midday and you don't have a choice. Like we're in the garden at noon. This is what's happening. Please have some clouds come over.
It's called like nature's softbox, which is fun. Yeah. Sometimes it can be a challenge if it's like one of those gloomy overcast days where everything just kind of looks super flat. But if it's just a general overcast day where it's kind of bright, you'll get some really beautiful light.
And so if you're dealing with harsh light in the garden and you don't have a choice, is there a way to soften it, diffuse it, maybe with somebody? Sometimes I'll use another person, right, to cast a shadow. Or maybe we can make that shadow with our own body.
Yeah, you always have to be careful then, too, to make sure that you don't see like an outline of said person walking. That's good for like a quick little up close photo of a certain plant. But I would say photograph towards, like follow with the light. Try not to photograph anything backlit. Your phone especially will start to really wash it out. You might get some of those weird sun flare glares as well. And I also think a common mistake is that we photograph gardens too close up. Maybe take a step back. We also tend to photograph at eye level. This time, maybe go a little bit higher, get a little bit lower, change, your perspective of what you're trying to photograph. And then here's also the thing, just practice. Take all those photos and look back and see which worked best for you. There's no saying that every photo that you take is going to be perfect. It's going back and figuring out what photos then tell the story of your garden or which ones you're drawn to. And each person is going to have their own opinion as well. But there's going to be a lot of bad photos, and that's okay.
Yep. And it's also subjective. You might love that plant. It might not be the greatest photo of that plant, but you love that plant, right? So that's your favorite. And when you mentioned the sun flares, there are people who deliberately use sun flares in their photos. And I think that's like hashtag sunflare. I'll see that a lot on social media. And, sometimes you don't have a choice. There's a sun flare, but it can be a cool effect if you know how to use it.
Definitely. And I use it in my garden photography work, but I'm not using my phone for it. I feel like the phones do lack understanding how to process that without making the rest of the photo super dark. And that is where having a DSLR, a mirrorless camera, really works well, because you can manipulate that sun flare to then work well with your photo that you're taking.
Yeah, and it's like looks a little artificial sometimes, right?
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
iPhone one.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a filter that I know of yet. I'm sure there is.
Sure there is. There's everything.
To put that in. But let's talk a little bit about other types of equipment. And that would be the tripod. So other photographers I've spoken to on this podcast highly recommend tripods, especially for close-ups of flowers and say a bee visiting a flower. I have to confess, Becca and I have had this conversation before on the side. Neither of us are tripod people. We're going to call it tripod people, the tribe. And I just have, for me, it's zero patience, and I'm not going to be carrying one around. And also when you're in a crowded group tour, it's kind of obnoxious, right? To have a tripod.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
They overwhelm me. I have a tripod, and don't get me wrong, there are times when I definitely need it. But for garden photography, I'm not doing a lot of macro work personally. A lot of my work is trying to tell the story, again, of the space. So I don't like the limitations of a tripod. I'm a bendy person when it comes to my photography. I'm not afraid to sit on the ground and point my camera up. Let's say, like, one of my favorite things to do at Longwood in the spring when the tulips are in bloom is, obviously they're beautiful and you can take a ton of photos, but I like to challenge myself to how can I photograph these tulips in a different way than what people usually see. So I like to get down low, and I like to photograph up at these tulips with a blue sky and create a different perspective and bend my body, and tripods just limit me from doing my weird body movements.
Yeah, I like the up, looking up into a flower. And you mentioned backlighting before, and I think that's one of my favorite things to do, like with lotus, especially when you're in a big lotus garden like Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens in DC, is to have the lotus leaf see the sunlight through it, but you're looking up from under it. Same with some of the larger flowers, you can do that through. Sometimes your tulip even, you can see the veining in a lot of the flowers and leaves. And if you can look up into a tree canopy, like see, cherry blossom time of year here in DC, looking up through that's always a fun photo to take too.
Yeah, and that's, again, noticing how light falls on a plant or a flower. You can use backlighting to your advantage. And again, I specifically now I'm thinking about when the blue poppies in March are at Longwood.
Yeah.
I have this one shot. One year they were in the acacia passage, and I photographed really low to the ground up at the blue poppy, and the sun was coming through and it just looked translucent and it was beautiful. And that was a fun way to see it in a different way, because I'm always now photographing for Longwood for almost 10 years. I am always looking for a new way to photograph the gardens. And that is a challenge of its own, because I've probably photographed every square inch almost of that space.
I can imagine. And I think for us home gardeners who want to capture our own garden, you don't see it through a visitor's eyes always. You see it through your own eyes.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Running a small business means I wear lots of hats. When I put on my hiring hat, I can count on LinkedIn Hiring Pro to make it easy. LinkedIn Hiring Pro helps manage my hiring workflow, puts my job post in front of a unique network of professionals, and matches me with the best candidates for my business. I can also share my job with my network. No other job site lets me do that. No wonder most small businesses say they'd use LinkedIn Hiring Pro again. Hire right the first time. Post your job for free on LinkedIn today at linkedin.com/quality.
It's kind of a challenge to turn around sometimes in a bed and see it how a newcomer would see it. So do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I think it is a fun way to experience your garden is honestly being with someone who hasn't seen it before or inviting a friend over and kind of seeing what they're drawn to helps see your space in a new light. But yeah, or like walking your garden backwards or going to a different viewpoint that you typically don't see. Just changing your routine of how you're typically viewing it. Like again, we live in a row home, so the main view is just looking straight out onto it. But if you climb these little like tiered rocks that we have and look down on it, it's a completely different view. And it challenges me to see a space that I'm so familiar with in a different way.
Mm-hmm. And I like that, getting some elevation. So maybe take a step ladder out one day and put it in different parts of your garden and look down. Might be cool, aside from what you talked about earlier, getting way down on the ground, maybe on your garden kneeler or a blanket and looking up into a bed. But I've had that experience too, Becca, where I've had somebody come and visit my garden and they run over to something that I not paying any attention to ever. And they're like, oh, this is so cool. And you're like, oh yeah, that would be good to take a photo of.
Right. And another thing that I love to do in gardens as well, besides just trying to find a story or a vignette, is the colors and textures, how they work together. I'm very drawn to photographing. Like our backyard specifically has a lot of like foliage kind of plants, and getting closer and photographing, that fern over another leaf and seeing how the colors and textures play with each other. Just trying a bunch of different things than just standing out there, pointing your camera at your garden and being like, that's the photo. Mm-hmm. Really, it's a lot about challenging yourself and practicing and just doing things differently each time.
Mm-hmm. I like that, looking for texture combinations. And you can cheat, right, Becca? You can snip off a fern leaf and lay it over a hosta. It doesn't have to be growing right next to each other. Right. Or you can, I've seen gardeners take one of each leaf from a shade garden and put it in a vase and then photograph that vase, and it's pretty cool.
Yes. And another thing with that's now my brain's going, is I'm very drawn to the shadows plants make. So specifically with our container garden out front, in the evening, the light is so soft and pretty, and it shines these beautiful shadows onto our little stoop. And I've been really drawn to photographing those recently. We have a bunch of coreopsis in bloom, and they create this beautiful little shadow. And then the wind blows and you're noticing the shadows on the ground. And that's a fun thing to play with too. And it helps you understand and get more familiar with light in your garden as well.
Mm-hmm. I always look for those sidewalk edges, at that evening golden hour where you see a reflection of, like, say, a row of echinacea that we talked about before. The ones that are single and tall make the best shadows, I think. And
agreed.
Really recognizable, almost like a black and white sticker. And I was thinking about doing some black and white photography. Have you experimented with that in the garden?
Yes, and actually, that's a really good point. I love playing with black and whites in the winter. That's typically, obviously, we're a little less inspired. I now thinking about this in the sense of Longwood, I challenged myself because winter, obviously, in the mid-Atlantic, it's a little rough. I'm not as creatively inspired, so I challenged myself to go to Longwood in the meadow specifically. And I have a smaller camera that's not my main camera. It's a Fuji, and I set it in this black and white mode. And black and white really eliminates the distraction of color, obviously, but it helps you see light in a different way. Obviously, if something's really dark, it's going to be that deep black, rich black color. And if something's really overexposed, it's going to be white. And then you'll also notice there's a ton of gray. Everything's probably going to look gray. So how can you create a little bit more contrast in your photos between those nice rich blacks and those whites? I think that's a fun practice, is how to see light is using your phone. And you can set it into a black and white mode on your phone with filters and stuff. That's a really great way to practice seeing light, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it that way, or shoot it regular and then do a filter and play around with that. That's always fun. And I was thinking about the silhouettes of seed heads in particular in the wintertime, especially if you get a light snow occasionally. Ooh. That's always pretty cool.
That is pretty. Yeah, I think seed heads are really sculptural pieces, especially in winter. So playing with how those are in your space is fun.
And the backs of flowers, I'm getting more and more obsessed. Like when you were talking about the blue poppies, the Himalayan poppy, the back of that is really cool. Ooh, but the back of sunflowers, that's a classic photo right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you're just changing what you would typically see or know about that flower. And again, it's just playing. And I think that's such a key to photography, is just playing and seeing what works.
And I think, Becca, my newest obsession photography wise is hairy. Like I love the tiny hairs along a stem, and then sometimes, depends on the flower, but a poppy might be a classic, will have hair around the sepals that really stand up, and you could really focus on them and get a really cool picture.
Definitely. And another tip with things like that, at least on your phone, if you're not familiar, is you can lock focus. And one of those things for, like, if you're trying to photograph a really wispy plant, let's say, if you stick your hand out next to where you want to get, that plant in focus, and with your other hand on your phone, you can hold down where your hand is, and that should lock your focus. And then you should be able to photograph some more of those wispy plants, or something that's a little more difficult to focus on. Obviously, there's some trial and error there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's a really good tip to then be able to photograph something that's very fine. And typically autofocus has a trickier time figuring out what the heck you're doing.
So frustrating, Becca, for me, because sometimes I'm trying to get that little fine flower in the foreground, and then the iPhone keeps trying to get the ground behind it, or the stem that's right behind it. And I'm like, no, I want that little tiny bee, that little miniature, tiny little native bee on this tiny little flower, and it will just not focus on it for me. I'll have 10 pictures in a row of just blur. I'm just like, this is annoying. But
that locking the focus thing seems to help a decent amount. And again, turning off that portrait mode, because to me, again, that portrait mode creates sometimes this fake looking depth of field that you can just tell is manipulated.
Yeah. And it was meant for faces. That's what the phone is modified for. And a flower face can be a cool face too to focus on, but it really is meant for the human face, and maybe your pets as well.
Yeah, something that's large that stands out, but a flower really has a hard time differentiating the background from what's in front of it.
Yeah, sometimes I'll use it for, say, a magnolia. a huge blossom
Ooh.
where you're like really getting in the middle of it, that can be a kind of cool effect.
Yeah, something that has a lot of separation from the rest of your background, it tends to do a decent job. But if something is really close, like if there's a lot of like quote unquote like clutter around, it's not going to work well, I found.
Good advice. And so how about your favorite filters that you use?
Okay, truthfully, for my phone, anything that I share typically in my Instagram stories is phone photos, and I don't put any filters. I rarely go back in and edit any of my phone work, probably because I always have an editing queue from my big camera. And the last thing I want to do is edit more on my phone.
Yep.
So trying to get it right in camera for my phone is always my goal. And I also love just how real it looks. Now, when you're actually taking the photos, you can mess with the exposure and make it a little darker or lighter to kind of simulate what editing would do. But yeah, for my phone, I just like what it is. That's not to say I don't go back in and sometimes like bump the saturation or vibrance up a little bit. But yeah, for the most part, everything that I do on my phone is pretty straightforward. On my camera, I am a big believer that photographing gardens, you shouldn't change the color filters too much. You want it to feel like real life. So when I'm editing on my computer with Lightroom, I'm basically just going in and color correcting, any white balance issues or exposure and just giving it a little bit of a pop because straight out of the camera raw files feel a little flat. So they do need a little bit of life given into them. But my editing style is very true to color because as a documentary style photographer, it's all about real life. And if I start slapping color filters on it hey, that flower was pink, but now it looks purple in the photo, that's not real.
Yeah, that's my, I would call it a pet peeve. And as journalism training, it's what's in the camera right there. Like you are trained to compose and crop in the lens. So that's how I still work and how I usually do it. If I do anything, it might be a minor cropping. Like somebody's little foot is sticking out from a shrub on the side, and I was trying not to get their person, but they just stepped into my shot. Like those are the few times that I'll usually crop or edit something at all. And that does bring up Becca and in the garden tours that we were recently on, and of course in Longwood, thousands of visitors you have to contend with. So it's always the battle of, do we include people in our pictures or try very hard not to get people in our pictures?
Yeah, and I think that comes down to, again, what story you're trying to tell with the photo. With crowds and crowds of people, that's not really the story we want to tell, is that this place feels kind of overwhelming. But funny enough, you say that, is when I was first starting out, I think this was kind of before I joined as a volunteer, I could only access the gardens during open hours. So I had to be creative and try to hide people. And now how do you hide people in that situation? Well, I would start to play with, if there was a plant in the foreground and someone was, further back in the frame, I would use that plant to be out of focus and cover the person. And funny enough, it kind of developed into my own style. I call them shoot throughs. I'm using those plants in the foreground to be soft and out of focus, but sometimes they're playing a part in hiding something or someone in the background that I don't want to see. So it kind of evolved into my own photography style, is using plants in the foreground to kind of give that depth of a scene, to give some visual interest, to feel like you're there and you're looking through. But sometimes I leave people in if, there's a beautiful path and I want a couple walking through or a child looking really happy. It really just depends on the emotion and that story you want to bring to your photo.
And I'm thinking for the home gardener, you might want to have somebody in there for scale. That's always nice. Or if you have some really nice garden seating, Especially,
Yes.
I like to photograph people from behind, say like they're in 2 Adirondack chairs and they're looking out into the garden. That's
Yes,
always a nice way to frame a garden photo.
definitely. It feels cozy. It feels inviting. It feels lived in, which is such a big part of how I personally like to photograph, is making it feel like something. My partner actually just told me the other day, as I was showing him some work of Longwood, and he was like, your photos feel nostalgic. Like you can feel the love you have for this place. And I thought that was very, very sweet way to approach it. So I guess, yeah, just creating that warmth. I love photographing a garden bench, or, you know, if you have any pets, or like you have a cat out in the garden, like photograph your pets in your space and the people you love in your space. I think that brings all those feelings and emotions right there.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to storytelling with our photos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it's easy to go outside, take a photo, but I still say, like, if you have the chance to slow down a little bit, see how the light is coming in. I think that is a lot of photography, especially in your home garden, is just noticing the light. What is it doing? When is it soft? When is it really bright? And just taking that moment of slowness first, and then see what you're drawn to. Maybe there's like a corner of your garden that you're feeling particularly called to go photograph. Is just trying to explain the context of your space to someone who might have never seen it before.
And I think maybe taking the same spot in different seasons would be a cool story to tell as well.
Absolutely.
And I was also thinking about maybe the same plant, you know, from emerging, say it's an annual, you know, like zinnia or something like that, and then being visited by a butterfly. If you could do like a series of photos just of one plant from seed to fruition.
Yeah, it makes you, again, appreciate your space. And I think it's cool to be able to then look back and say you photographed a specific scene in every season, to, again, because sometimes in that winter period, you are like, wow, are we ever going to see greenery again? Those late Februarys where you're just like, wow, I'm really over winter. Having those photos to look back on and appreciate that soon everything will come back to life again. It's just a little friendly reminder that spring is on its way.
Another thing I like to do for storytelling is before and afters. I think a lot of gardeners, we just jump into the project and we forget to take the before picture. Maybe we take a during picture if we remember at that point, and then we love taking the after, right? You redid a bed, you weeded out the bed, reclaimed it, planted new things in it. And I'm like, but it was a great transformation, but you never got those before shots. I imagine that Longwood, you have a lot of those.
Yeah, and it was crazy is that I was at Longwood during the Reimagined project. I never thought that, you know, the Palm House, the Rose House, all of those spaces would soon be gone. It was one of those things, you know, we did take for granted, was just knowing the ins and outs. And then, you know, when we received the news that there was going to be this whole new conservatory and some of my most beloved spaces, like I was always drawn to the Mediterranean garden in the old conservatory. And when that was going to be removed, I remember doing that last lap of photographing the gardens and thinking, this is now history. It was very powerful to reflect on. So same with photographing your own garden, is, you know, that is the history of your own space, is those before photos. And you can see how much has grown over the years.
And just even, you know, going back to when you first moved into your home, what it looked like. You might have had one picture of the front from your realtor.
Yeah.
Then maybe years later, you're like, ooh, I should have taken a lot more of that before. So just want to put that out to everybody to take some before, even if they don't love the way it looks, you're going to love watching that transition.
Yeah. And it makes you, again, I'm a big sappy girl. And I love appreciating what the change is.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I would say is take pictures of the ugly parts, and that means like your tool shed. I love a picture of a compost pile, Becca. I like the decay. I like the messiness. I love seeing how different gardeners do different things, like stacking their pots. A good,
Yeah.
several stacks of pots in a corner. I love that. And a lot of people neglect to take those pictures.
I think it's all part of the overall story of your space. So all of those, I love those messy little moments, when you're in the middle of gardening and you just stop and take off your gloves for a second and you photograph like what you're actually doing in that moment. The tools are everywhere. You're probably a little sweaty. Just document the stage in which you're at. It's fun to look back and see, again, that whole process, the whole story of a space come to be.
Mm-hmm. And I always think in that storytelling, showing your tools, showing your gloves, showing a pile of plants before they go in, that maybe it's your cart at the garden center. That's another fun one to show. This is what you bought and this is where it eventually went in your garden. I always think, Becca, about maybe someday, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, somebody in your family or somebody in the future is looking back and they're like, ooh, that's what a pruner looked like back then. Well, we don't use that anymore. Who knows what they're using in the future?
Right. It's just all of that is, I think, special to do.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about animals. And that could be, you talked about photographing your pets, maybe your children in the garden, but those visiting wildlife. And I am horrible at this, Becca, because I always scare off the creature.
It's hard.
Or I'm just too impatient. Like I never get a really good shot. I have a crow that comes and visits me. I've named him Fenton. And usually I just feed Fenton and then I forget to take his picture.
Yeah.
Other creatures that come, you have to have a lot of patience to be a good wildlife photographer.
Yeah. And truthfully, my mom would love me to be a hummingbird photographer. But I personally don't have that kind of patience sometimes. But yes, in the case of a garden, I think pets are a little bit easier. They kind of just wander through and sometimes you can catch them in a good little spot. And then I do love stalking a butterfly on flowers.
Yep.
That does require a slowness and a gentleness. You can't just rush up on that butterfly when you're excited, which I have done. You kind of just have to wait again. And same with hummingbirds even. I do know that they are I'm pretty sure they're cyclical in the way that they will feed on a flower and then they'll fly off. But they usually do come around and they do that cycle a few times. So if you're anticipating it, you might be able to grab one. Again, that's just a lot of high action stuff. And I could get into the nitty gritty of technical aspects of keeping your shutter speed high enough to photograph moving objects. But yeah, it does come down to patience.
Yeah, you want to catch the hummingbird looking still, but with its wings, maybe will be blurred at that point.
Yeah. Sometimes, honestly, that's when I switch on to video mode on my phone and I just take a video of it instead.
That's a good tip that, I can catch maybe that little garden visitor on video and then just enjoy that little snippet later because I'm never going to catch that motion, that quick creature usually with a photo, or it's going to look really funny, like just the back end of it running off.
Right. And you can always screenshot. I mean, that's not the best way to go about it. But you know what? If you're trying to really just enjoy this butterfly, take a little video. I think it's okay. You don't have to always take the perfect photo.
And speaking of videos, I was thinking about maybe panning across your garden. So can you talk a little bit about taking those big shots of your entire landscape? Those of us who are allowed to have drones, inside the Beltway, it's a no-no. We can't have drones here. But I'm guessing Longwood and other gardens that you photographed, you can do drones and other long shots.
I have personally not entered the world of drones, truthfully, because I know you have to go through almost like a pilot's license and there's paperwork and stuff. So I have not ventured into that world just yet. Video is still something that I like to do for personal. I haven't really gone into that world professionally, but the videos I do are on my phone, and I necessarily don't pan across the garden. I am a big fan of, again, finding a scene in your garden. And this, I'm looking out the window right now as it's windy. Noticing movement in your garden is really interesting. Like if you have grasses and the way it's swaying in the wind, or those shadows showing up on the ground and, those moving. I'm really drawn to things like that versus, panning across the entirety of the garden. Because sometimes we do that kind of fast. And as a viewer potentially watching that, it can feel a little nauseating. So maybe finding like a scene in your garden and, staying still for about 10 seconds and noticing that movement. But when it does come to photography, photographing your garden from, the widest place you can view the whole space, and then kind of like working your way in will tell the story of the entire space versus just like, again, that really up close picture of a flower you absolutely love. Like step back and see it in the scene. So that way someone can understand the context of that space.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to do it. And I was thinking also, Becca, about creating those vignettes in your garden. So maybe you have a grouping of containers that you've already done, but maybe you can also move things around for some photography vignettes that you set up.
Yeah, I love in our little stoop, we have this little corner of containers, and it's really fun to photograph all the different colors of the pots and whatnot. I personally don't move anything because I'm a big believer of, again, with that documentary style in me, is I want it to feel like exactly like someone would come in and see it. But that's not to say if you're practicing, up close pictures of a flower and you want to move something into better light or just practice that way, that's totally okay. But I think for the concept of documenting your space, making it feel as authentic as possible is important.
Yeah, I think I will do minor cleanups, like a leaf falls onto that container.
Oh, yeah.
Then you can remove that dead leaf.
Get
right?
out of there.
Yeah. Or, something that the wind would do, or turning the container slightly. So rotating it. So you're like, ooh, the fuller part of the plant is over here because it's more towards the sun. But let me turn that a little just so I can see it better for the photo.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so how can our listeners contact you to find out more, Becca?
Of course. I'm very active on social media. I have 2 different Instagram accounts. One is totally just photography in general, which is my portrait work, my wedding work, my garden work. It's like the landing page, and that is at Becca Mathias Photo. If you're looking to just follow me on Instagram for just my garden nature work, my Instagram there is Gardens by Becca. And both of those have their own respective websites as well. If you're looking for just general photography work of mine, it is beccamathiasphoto.com. And just my garden photography is gardensbybecca.com.
Great. And this might be a stumper of a question, Becca, but I saved this one for last.
Ready.
And those are your favorite photographers or garden photographers or people's work that you look up to or enjoy?
Yeah, I have 2 different camps for this. So I am obviously anyone in the photography world or just garden photography appreciating in general knows Claire, I think it's pronounced Takush. She is a phenomenal garden photographer. I have several of her books, one including a book of Wyncliffe that she photographed. The way she sees light and tells stories of gardens is so beautiful and inspiring. And she does a really great job of, again, that context of a garden. Adore her work. I need to buy like every book she has ever photographed. Huge inspiration of mine. And then on a more local note, before I was on the Longwood photography team, I really admired Hank Davis. He has been photographing for Longwood way longer than I have, and I always was drawn to the way, again, he photographed the gardens. He's also an incredible hummingbird photographer and bird photographer in general. Maybe one day I'll purchase a very expensive lens and have some more patience and sit down and do the kind of work he does. But he is just a great guy, and his work was always an inspiration of mine before I got to know him on the team.
Well, I think a lot of people find your photography inspirational, Becca, and I invite our listeners to check out her Instagram accounts in particular and comment, like, share on all of those. And I want to thank you for joining us, Becca.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really, really appreciate it. And also, I would love to see other people's photos of their gardens. Feel free to send them to me. I would love to see your spaces, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me.
Great. Thank you, Becca.
Thank you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the genius ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Get business done with the new American Express Graphite Business Cash Unlimited card. With unlimited 2% cash back on all eligible purchases, unlimited 5% cash back on flights and prepaid hotels booked through American Express Travel Online, and a flexible spending capacity that can grow with your business, you'll have the confidence to keep building. Apply today and earn a welcome offer of $1,500 cash back after you spend $50,000 in qualifying purchases on your new card within the first 6 months of card membership. Terms apply. Learn more at go.amex/graphite.
Lemongrass plant profile. Lemongrass, Cymbopogon flexuous, and Cymbopogon citratus is grown for its strongly lemon-scented leaves and decorative qualities. The plant is perennial in hot climates, but must be treated as an annual or grown as an indoor-outdoor plant in our region. It's also known as fever grass, cochin grass, and Malabar grass. Lemongrass is a member of the grass family. They grow well in containers. As soon as the danger of frost has passed in the spring, put the containers out in full sun, and then in the fall, transition the pots indoors before they are hit by a freeze. During the summer, keep the plants evenly moist and fertilized with an organic vegetable fertilizer. It is a clumping grass with narrow arching leaves that can grow 3 feet long. The leaves bend downward near the tips. A mature planting has a fountain-like appearance. Lemongrass can be harvested one blade at a time, as needed during the growing season. They can be clipped off at the soil line. Lemongrass stalks and smaller pieces can also be dried and preserved, but the best way to use it as a fresh ingredient in soups, sauces, curries, and stir-fries. Folded or cut leaves can be tied in bundles and added to flavor dishes and beverages. It can be propagated by seeds or division. Lemongrass plants are unlikely to bloom or produce seeds in our short growing season. Food markets usually separate lemongrass clumps into individual plants, trim the free-flowing parts of their leaves short, and label them as lemongrass stalks. It's the fleshy stalks that are most often used in cooking. Some of these stalks come with the roots still attached and can be used to start new plants. Lemongrass is related to citronella and is said to repel mosquitoes. However, you have to rub the essential oils of the plant on your skin in order for it to work. Deer generally leave lemongrass alone due to its strong citrus scent and sharp leaf edges. Lemongrass, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I'm enjoying the blooms on my cup flowers and the phlox jenna. Over at the community garden plot, we're harvesting okra and pinching back our basil. In garden tips that we shared this week on social media, we talked all about gardening safety, including when cleaning out your garden shed, dispose of any garden chemicals safely and according to their label instructions. Bring unused product in its original container to a licensed local authority waste site. If you're in the greater Washington, D.C. area, a couple events you might want to attend include the Urban Foraging, Cider Tasting, and Cyanotype Printing at ANXO, ANXO, 711 Kennedy Northwest in D.C. This program is offered twice, once on Wednesday, August 26th at 6 p.m. and again on Sunday, August 30th at 3 p.m. Discover delicious wild plants growing underfoot, sample award-winning cider, and create a botanical sunprint using foraged plants. Friend of the podcast, forager, author, and instructor April Thompson will be running this unique workshop. To register for it, go to Eventbrite. And then a reminder that the DC State Fair is coming up on Sunday, September 6th, and you need to sign up for some of those contests in advance, including our flower arranging contest that we do live on site at the DC State Fair. You won't want to miss that. Another thing to sign up for now in advance is the Urban Tree Summit, which will be held on Wednesday, September 23rd at the Silver Spring Civic Center in downtown Silver Spring. Find out more about that at urbantreesummit.org. I'm teaching a webinar for Brookside Gardens on Thursday, October 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It is getting your garden ready for winter, and we talk all about your winter garden to-do list, which chores are essential, and which chores you can safely skip. This is a $15 fee, and you can register for it through Montgomery Park's website. Registration will open in early August, and because it's a webinar, anyone worldwide can join us. It will be recorded, and the recording will be sent to the registrants afterwards, whether they were able to attend live or not. I hope you can join us.
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Food Gardening Network with How to Slice and Zoodle Your Zucchinis by Amanda MacArthur. There's nothing quite as rewarding as harvesting fresh zucchinis from your own backyard. And there's rarely a shortage, as most gardeners know. There's even National Sneak Some Zucchini Onto Your Neighbor's Porch Day, which occurs every August 8th. So with such an abundance of these fruits, what comes next after plucking these beauties from the vine? For me, it's how I'm going to prepare them. Zucchinis can be sliced lengthwise, in rounds, in half moons, in chunks, or they can be ground into zucchini noodles, zoodles, and served hot or cold. Zucchinis are hugely versatile, so let's get into the many ways to prepare it for recipes. Before diving into slicing and zoodling, selecting zucchinis at their peak is crucial. Look for firm, evenly colored specimens with few blemishes or soft spots. Harvesting them when they're small to medium size ensures optimal flavor and texture. The larger they grow, the more bland they become, and the seeds become inedible, just like cucumbers. Once you've gathered your zucchinis, rinse them under cold water to remove any dirt or debris. Pat them dry with a clean kitchen towel or paper towel to ensure a firm grip during slicing. Slicing zucchinis is a fundamental skill that opens up a world of culinary possibilities. Whether adding them to salads, stir-fries, grilling them as a side dish, mastering the art of slicing is essential. A sharp chef's knife is your best friend for slicing. These knives provide precision and control, allowing you to easily achieve uniform cuts. Start by trimming off the stem and blossom ends of the zucchini using a sharp knife. Then, depending on your recipe's requirements, you can slice them into rounds, half moons, or quarters. For salads and raw dishes, try thinly slicing the zucchinis to around 1/8 to 1/4 inch thickness. This creates a delightful crunch and freshness in your dishes. For sautéing or roasting, opt for slightly thicker slices. This ensures a soft texture and prevents the zucchinis from becoming too mushy during cooking. A mandolin can be very helpful in achieving uniform cuts as well. So now, what about the zoodle, a low-carb alternative to traditional pasta that has taken the culinary world by storm? With the help of a spiralizer, you can transform humble zucchinis into long, curly strands that mimic the texture of noodles. Okay, maybe only slightly. Invest in a quality spiralizer with sharp blades to zoodle like a pro. This ensures smooth, consistent noodles every time. I prefer the ones that suction cup to the counter. The handheld ones work but rarely deliver precision or smooth zoodles. Another way to make them is to use a vegetable peeler to make long fettuccine-like noodles. You'll peel from top to bottom all the way around until you reach the seeds. The peel pieces will be more firm, but they hold up the best to sautéing. Once you've spiralized or shaved your zucchinis, you can enjoy them raw in salads, lightly sautéed as a pasta substitute, or even incorporated into soups. My personal preference is a light lemon cream sauce with salt and pepper. I just think it tastes better than a red sauce. So, here are your tips for success. Use a very sharp knife when you're slicing your zucchinis. Invest in a quality spiralizer for zoodling. Don't overcrowd the pan when cooking. Season generously with herbs, spices, and citrus. Remove excess moisture by salting them in a colander and letting them sit for 30 minutes, then patting dry. Experiment with different zucchini varieties for added color and flavor, and utilize zucchini scraps for flavoring stocks, soups, or baked goods. Now go off and elevate your zucchinis from mere vegetables to culinary delights with the right tools and techniques. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, you may also like GardenDC podcast episode 238, Flower Photography Tips, episode 202, Documenting Gardens, episode 17, Garden Photography. You can become a listener supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too. Happy gardening!